Welcome to section 3.2, compound statements and connectives. Objective number 1, express compound statements in symbolic form. So statements formed by combining two or more simple statements are called compound statements. Words called connectives are used to join simple statements to form a compound statement. Connectives include words such as and, or, if then, and, if, and only if. The statements of symbolic logic and their translations are given as follows. For negation, we have a squiggly line read as not. So if we place this in front of a variable like p, it would read not p. A conjunction, it has kind of like an up arrow. This symbolizes the word and. So if we're looking at two statements, it would be P and Q. Disjunction has an arrow going down that symbolizes the word or. Conditional is an arrow pointing to the right that symbolizes the phrase if then. So P, if P then Q, and then biconditional is a double-sided arrow meaning if and only if. Okay. Now there are other phrases that can be used to symbolize each of the different symbolic forms. So for P and Q, we would have P and Q, but you could also say P but Q, P yet Q, P nevertheless Q. Okay, so if any of those phrasing is mentioned in your statement, you can always write it in symbolic form using the and symbol. The next one is P or Q. That could also be written as P or Q or both. Next, we have not P. This could also be said as it is not true that P. Next, we have if P, then Q. We can also state that as if PQ, Q if P is sufficient for Q is necessary for P only if Q then P, or only if Q, P. And then the last one, we have the biconditional, which is the double-sided arrow. This is read as P if and only if Q if and only if P is necessary and sufficient for Q is necessary and sufficient for P, if P then Q, and if Q then P. Okay. So in our guided examples here, we're going to be given two statements, and then we need to translate the symbolic form into words. So for number 1, we have two statements, P and Q. P says Joe is making breakfast. Q's statement is Abe is setting the table. Now we need to translate the following into words. So the first one, we have not Q. So the statement for Q is Abe is setting the table. So not Q would be Abe is not setting the table. Okay. The second one, P and not Q. So P is Joe is making breakfast. Is making breakfast. And not Q. Abe is not setting the table. Okay. So Joe is not making breakfast is the P. And then we have and then the second part would be not Q. Okay. All right. And the next one we have conditional. So if Q, then P. So if Q, so if Abe is setting the table, then Joe is making breakfast. Okay. Awesome. All right, next we have our statements P and Q. P is it is after 5 p.m. Q is they are working. We need to write each compound statement below in symbolic form. So now we're going in the opposite direction. Okay. So we have a statement, they are working, and it is 5 p.m. So they are working is Q, statement Q, and that's the symbol. It is 5 p.m. That's P. Okay. Next we have it is not after 5 p.m. and they are working. So it is not after 5 p.m. is symbolic for the squiggle line. After 5 p.m. would be P, and they are working, which is Q. So not P and Q. Next, the statement for P is a person is a teenager. Q is a person is a younger than 20-year-old. Okay. We need to write each compound statement below in symbolic form. So the first one, if a person is not a teenager, then the person is not younger than 20 years old. Okay. So we know we have if then, which means we are going to be working with a conditional statement. We also know that we have two nots, so we're going to have the negation symbol. So not a teenager. So P is a person that is a teenager. So we want not a teenager. Then for the second statement, we have a person younger than 20 years old. That is Q, but we want a person that's not younger than 20 years old. So we have to add the negation. Okay, next one. If a person is younger than 20 years old, then that person is not a teenager. So if then, which means we're still conditional. The first statement is a person is younger than 20 years old. That's the statement Q. That person is not, so negation, a teenager, P. So Q, if Q, then not P. All right. Next one, our statement for P is I'm leaving. Q is you're staying. So for the first one, I'm leaving and you're staying. I'm leaving is the statement P and you're staying is the statement Q. Next, you're not staying, but I'm leaving. So if you recall back to when we were listing out the other common English translations, but is another way of saying and. Okay. So our first statement, we have a not. Okay. So not staying, you're not staying. So your staying is Q. So not staying would be not Q. And then I'm leaving is the statement for P. All right. Our P statement is this is an alligator, and Q is this is a reptile. So for the first one, if this is an alligator, then this is a reptile. Okay. So we know we're working with if then, so that's conditional. This is an alligator is the statement for P. This is a reptile is the statement for Q. Okay. Next, if this is not an alligator, then this is not a reptile. Still working in the conditional. This is an alligator is P, but we want this is not an alligator, so that's not P. This is a reptile is Q, but we want this is not a reptile, so that's not Q. Okay, number 6, we have 3 statements, P, Q, and R. P is you got an A, Q is this course is easy, and R is you studied hard. So the first one, you did not get an A, or you didn't study hard. Okay, so we're dealing with or. You got an A is the statement P, but you did not get an A would be not P. The second statement, you study hard is R, but you did not study hard is not R. Okay. Next one, you studied hard and you did not get an A. So and is the up arrow. You studied hard is R. You did get an A is P, but our statement says you did not get an A. So that would be not P. Okay. If you study hard, then this course is easy. If then, so we know we have conditional. You study hard, that's the statement R. This course is easy, Q. All right. Next. Okay. If this course isn't easy and you get an A, then you study hard. Okay. So I see if and then and. Okay. Now, for an if then, we know that something has to happen before something else can occur. Well, if this course is easy and you get an A, then you studied hard. So if this occurs, then this occurs. Okay. So within the symbolic form, we're actually going to have a grouping. Okay. So our first grouping is going to be the if, and then our second will be the then. So in the if clause, we have this course isn't easy. So isn't easy is also a negation. So this course is easy. If we recall, if we go back, this course is easy is Q. Okay. So this course isn't easy would be not Q. And you got an A. So you got an A is P. So we have not Q and P. Okay, so that's the if clause. Then you studied hard, and studied hard is R. Okay. Next, you got an A if and only if you studied hard or the course is easy. Okay, similar to the previous one. You got an A if and only if all of this occurred. Okay, so the second part here is going to be our grouping. So you got an A. So you got an A, if we go back, is P. If and only if is a double-sided arrow. Okay. You studied hard, that's R. Or the course is easy, that's Q. Awesome. All right, objective 2, express symbolic statements with parentheses in English. So many compound statements contain more than one connective. When expressed symbolically, parentheses are used to indicate which simple statements are grouped together. When expressed in English, commas are used to indicate the groupings. Here's a table that illustrates groupings using parentheses in symbolic statements and commas in English statements. Okay, so the last two problems that we just did were introduction into this objective. So if we have a symbolic statement like the two that we have here, all right, Q and not P. So if Q then and not P, then not R. So the statement that's grouped together is Q and not P. Okay. The next one, Q and if not P, then not R. And what's grouped together is the not P and the not R. All right, so let's do some problems with grouping. So we are given P and Q statements. We need to write each of the following symbolic statements in words. Okay. All right, so we previously looked at the common ways to translate the symbolic form. So I will be presenting one way to write these statements. However, you could use a different form from that chart to write these statements. Okay. So first we're going to start in the grouping P and Q. So we're going to take P statement and Q statement, but it's not P and Q. Okay. So the not means that it is not true that he earns $105,000 yearly and that he is often happy. Okay. Next one, not Q and P. Okay. So not Q. So he is not often happy. And P. He earns $105,000 yearly. Okay. Then we have not of the grouping Q, if Q, then P. So it is not true. It is not true that if he is often happy, then he earns $105,000 yearly. Awesome. Let's do another one. We have three statements here, P, Q, and R. Statement P says the plant is fertilized. Q, the plant is not watered. And R, the plant wilts. We need to write the following in words. So we'll first take our grouping and then add on the phrase outside of our grouping. All right, so our connective here is a conditional, meaning if then. So we'll start our grouping off with if P, and P is the plant is fertilized. So if the plant is fertilized and not Q. So Q is the plant is not watered. So not Q would be the plant is watered. So if the plant is fertilized and watered, then notice that I put a comma there to identify when the grouping ends. So then not R. So R is the plant wilter. So not R would be the plant will not wilt. All right, let's do the next one. P and the grouping not if not Q, then not R. So let's first start with P. The plant is fertilized and if the plant, not Q, is watered, okay, then not R. The plant will not wilt. Okay. Alrighty. Okay, we have three statements here as well, P, Q, and R. P says the temperature is above 85 degrees. Q, we finish studying. R, we go to the beach. Okay. So we have conditional here, if then. So if P, so that's if the temperature is above 85 degrees, and Q, we have finished studying, okay, comma, then R, we will go to the beach. Okay, next we have P and the grouping Q, if Q, then R. So P first. The temperature is above 85 degrees, and if Q, if we have finished studying, then R, we will go to the beach. Alrighty. Objective number 3, use the dominance of connectives. So if a symbolic statement appears without parentheses, statements before and after the most dominant connective should be grouped. Symbolic connectives are categorized from the least dominant negation to the most dominant, the biconditional. So groupings in symbolic statements are determined as follows. Unless parentheses follow the negation symbol, only the statement that immediately follows is negated. When translating symbolic statements into English, the simple statements in parentheses appear on the same side of the comma. If a symbolic statement appears without parentheses, group statements before and after the most dominant connective, where dominance is defined as follows. You have negation, which is the least dominant. Then you have conjunction and disjunction. Then you have conditional, and then biconditional. Okay. Alrighty. Let's do some examples. So here we're asked to write each compound statement below in symbolic form. So our first statement is, if there is too much homework or a teacher is boring, then I do not take that class. So let's write out our three statements. So P is going to be, there is too much homework. That's the first statement. The second statement is, a teacher is boring. And the third statement is, I take the class. So we want the positives of each statement, not the negations. So we know we're dealing with an if-then, so we are going to have a conditional. So we have our first clause, the if, and then the second clause, the then. Okay, so the if clause is going to be a grouping. So there is too much homework, that's P, or a teacher is boring, that's Q. Then I do not take that class. So not take that class, which is R. Okay. Next one, there is too much homework, or if a teacher is boring, then I do not take the class. Okay. So we have an if-then statement. So we are going to group together the whole if-then together. Okay. So there is too much homework, that is P, or if a teacher is boring, so that's Q, then I do not take the class, so not R. Okay. Let's do another one. Okay, we're going to write each compound statement in symbolic form. We're going to let letters assigned to the simple statements represent English statements that are not negated. If commas do not appear in compound English statements, we're going to use the dominance of connectives to show grouping symbols in symbolic statements. Okay, so first one, I miss class if and only if it's not true that both I like my teacher and the course is interesting. It is not true. It is not true for both of them. Okay. All right. So first one, P, Q, R. All right. P, we're doing the positive, so not the negated. I like the teacher. Q, the course is interesting. And R, I miss class. Okay. Now, if you assigned it in a different order, that's okay. Just make sure that you label it so that I am aware of what each letter represents. Okay. So I miss class. That's R. If and only if. Okay. It is not true that both I like the teacher and the course is interesting. Okay. All right. Next one. If I like the teacher, I do not miss class. If and only if the course is interesting. Okay. So if I like the teacher, I don't miss class. So this is an if then, even though then is not present in the statement. Okay. So we have a grouping here. Okay. And then if and only if something occurs. So I like the teacher is P. I do not miss class, so not R. If and only if the course is interesting, Q. All right. And that completes section 3.2.